Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. After some time, it's been a hot minute. I know I haven't uploaded in September, so it's been 2 weeks since I filmed and uploaded a video. I have to film, of course, first in order to upload. I'm sorry about that. I was just too busy. And the reason for my busyness actually led to this video because I wanted to talk about translations and how they work or don't work and why. Because I vented my frustration. Back up. The work I had to do was I had to correct the Dutch translation of my novel. I have a new novel coming out in November, which I wrote in English, but my Haus publisher is a Dutch publishing house in Amsterdam, so the novel will be published in Dutch first and then hopefully sold to other countries and be available in other languages. For instance, in English, the language I wrote it in. But anyway, what I had to do is I got the draft of the translation done by a professional translator from English to Dutch, and I had to correct it. And it was a lot of work because it was not that good. There were quite some mistakes, things I didn't like. Anyway, and I vented to complete the sentence I started a half an hour ago. I vented about this to a couple of my friends, and they said, why don't you make a video about it? Because it's interesting to hear about how translations are done. So I thought for my first video in 2 weeks, I might as well just do a chatty one and talk about translations. Maybe you find that interesting. I got interested in the quality of translations and how a translation can sometimes change a book, not for the better. Often, I have to admit, was when I, as an author, was confronted with translations. So I published my first novel quite some time ago in 2013. I wrote the book in German. And then it was translated into Dutch, same publishing house, different translator. It was translated into English and other languages. And there were other books that I wrote, the crime books that had been translated. So the translation that I now corrected of my new novel was actually the 8th translation that I looked at. So even though this is not empirical evidence, I became interested because I had to correct translations, but I also looked at books by famous authors and read the original and then a German or a Dutch translation. And often I had to conclude it's not that good. The translation is not that good. And so I started to, think about translations more and how that works. And there are a couple of things I feel are important to know if you read translated works of fiction. And I'm only talking about fiction here, not technical translations or not even nonfiction, but just fiction. The first thing you have to know is that everybody can become a translator. There are schools and education for translators, but it's not a requirement. So a lot of translators, almost all of them work freelance. A lot of translators don't have a specific education in translating or in translation or whatever you want to call it. They just speak a second language really well. So they have a mother tongue and then they live in a foreign country or for some other reason, maybe they're bilingual or they acquired a second language and then they start translating. I think that's not always a good idea because I feel, that's the title of the video, that translating is an art. And the fact that you speak multiple languages doesn't necessarily make you a good translator. I speak English and Dutch. My mother tongue is German. I wouldn't feel qualified to translate an English novel into German, to be honest, even though I speak both languages. So I feel that the fact that translations or translators are not, certified, sometimes has negative effects on the quality. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of good translators out there who take their work very seriously, who are excellent, and we need translators because otherwise, as readers and for me as an author, we wouldn't be able to read most of the world's literature if there weren't any translators. So they are really important. That's a WhatsApp, but I will not answer that right now. Anyway, but the fact that everybody can become a translator if you just speak two languages causes issues, I would say, sometimes. The second thing I think causes issues even more is that translators are paid quite poorly, and they are paid by word. So that means the less time you spend on a translation, the more money you earn per hour. And if you want to make a living as a translator, you just can't spend hours and hours and days and weeks and months on a certain book. I mean, apart from the fact that the publisher won't give you the time because there's a deadline. There's one translator that I admire greatly. She lives in my hometown, or she lived because she died, and that's Svetlana Gaia, and she became famous because she translated 5 of the big Dostoevsky novels from Russian to German, a new translation. They had been translated before, but her translation is famous. I will leave a link to her Wikipedia page to check her out, and also a link to a documentary made about her that is available. It's in German, but it's available with English subtitles if you are interested in looking at her work. And she took a lot of time. She translated the work. She earned her living as a teacher. She was a Russian teacher in my hometown in high school. And she translated, and then she had somebody else go through the book with her sentence by sentence translation and original in order, to make it better. And she took her time. She didn't have to earn the money with it. And because Dostoevsky is dead anyway, there wasn't a deadline like you have to be done in 2 months. But that's not how it normally works. So translators have to work fast because of deadlines, but also because they have to earn a living. And in addition to that, because they have to earn a living, most of them, even if they wouldn't admit it, they all use translation programs. You're probably familiar with the Google translation program, and the translation programs they use, the software they use, it's much better. It's not like a Google translation, but still it's a program. So the program doesn't always detect idioms or certain expressions. So after the program is done, you have this first draft, and then the translator has to go through the translation and look, at flaws or mistakes. And that's where the real work is. And that's where a lot of translators don't have the time or the financial capability of spending a lot of time on the translation. And the third thing, and they all sort of, work together in order to cause problems, I would say. The third thing is that nobody, in 99.9% of the cases, nobody checks the translation. First of all, because oftentimes the publisher who acquires a book written by a Japanese author, and the publishing house is UK publishing, so it has to be translated from Japanese into English. Nobody at the English publishing house speaks Japanese. So the editor responsible for the English translation can't check the translation because he or she doesn't speak Japanese. And there is no money to hire somebody speaking Japanese and Dutch, a second opinion, if you will, to check the translation. The author can't check it most of the time either, because, if you're an author like me, I'm lucky because at least I can check 3 languages, German, Dutch, and English. But my first book, my first novel that I wrote in German had been translated into multiple languages: Danish, Greek, Hebrew, Italian. I don't speak any of these languages, so I don't know whether the translation was good or not. It often baffles me that people, whether it's readers or whether it's, the judges of the Booker International, I will come to that book in a minute, praise the translation, that the translation is so good. They can't judge that. Not if they hadn't read the original. They can say they like the language of the translation, they like the writing, as you will, but they can't judge if the translation is any good. Anyway, a couple of examples to illustrate what I mean when I say oftentimes the translation is not quite as it should be. Sometimes there are mistakes that are, you can say it has been wrongly translated. The translation is just wrong, but it's not that important. From my own book that I just corrected, there's one sentence, for instance. I wrote in the English original, Elias slept in on Friday morning. The Dutch version now reads, if I translate that back into English, Elias went to bed late Friday night. That's not what I wrote, but it's not, it's not changing the course of history. It's wrong, but it's not, I wouldn't say it doesn't affect the quality of the book, despite being wrong. But there are translation mistakes or decisions that a translator makes that definitely change the book in a way that is, I would say, not for the better. And I already mentioned the Booker International, and the prize was awarded just 2 weeks or so ago to a Dutch book, a Dutch author, Marieke Lucas Reineveld, with her book in the English translation called The Discomfort of Evening. And by the way, the judges praised the translation, and I'm sure none of the judges speak Dutch or read the Dutch original. So, but anyway, I read both versions, the Dutch original and the English one, and I didn't think the English translation was that good. And one example where a minor example, there are many, but that's a minor example because it goes throughout the book, and for me it really changed something of the atmosphere. The author has set the book in a very conservative, very religious village in Holland in the present day, and the main protagonist, is a young girl, 12-ish, throughout the book, and the girl talks about her parents, and when she does so, he uses, for instance, the word mother. So she would say, "Mother told me to put on a jacket." That sentence is not in the book, but just to give you an idea. So "Mother told me to put on a jacket." The use of the term mother says something, first of all, about the relationship between mother and daughter, but also about the setting, because it's very stiff to say it in this way. And, that's typical for this environment, for this conservative, very religious environment. They wouldn't use a term of endearment like mummy. In the English translation, though, the English translator used the word mum throughout the book whenever the author said mother. And for me, that significantly changed the atmosphere of the book, and I think it's the wrong choice. Another example from my own work that I just finished correcting the Dutch translation of the English text of my own book is that my main protagonist, who slept in Friday morning, also has a daughter in her early 20s. And at one point in the novel, the daughter cooks dinner for her father and herself, and the father says, "This was delicious. I didn't know you had become such a chef." The Dutch version, before I corrected it, read, if I translated back into English, the Dutch version read, "This was delicious. I didn't know you had become such a kitchen princess." So the term chef became kitchen princess, which first of all is a sexist way of translating chef just because it's a young woman, but it's also wrong because it changes the relationship between the father and the daughter, the way the father would talk to his daughter. And it's one word, but I feel it's important. If I hadn't been able to read Dutch, the book would have been published with chef turned into kitchen princess. And that's not what I said, and it's not what I meant, and it's not the right tone. So anyway, those are my chatty remarks about translations. And again, I feel that translators need to be paid better, and there needs to be money to check translations to make the work better. That's for the reader, but also for the author. Because oftentimes when I read an English book by an English author, and then I want to recommend the book to my German friends, I always first look at the translation. I read the first 20 pages or so of the translation, and oftentimes I feel I can't recommend the book because the translation is just not good enough. Anyway, enough rambling about translation. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed these rambles, translation rambles. I hope you're still all safe and healthy. I'm looking forward to your comments, as always, especially if you have something to add or comment on with regards to translations. And I will see you all soon in the next one.